I actually LinkedIn, or what's the right word for that? I checked you in LinkedIn. Not all of you, but before I came to this conference, haven't been for a while on such conferences. And I checked my co-performers, and when I saw that this LinkedIn feed was actually really nice. A lot of very beautiful people, very smart ones. And in a way, it actually reminded me of my daughter's Instagram, because it was kind of too beautiful. And when I started to think, is LinkedIn actually a collaboration platform, or is it also a competition platform? And I believe it is both. But the problem is that I don't know what it is more. Is it more like Instagram, or is it more like something else? And when I got this idea, what if LinkedIn was not a private company, but it would be a foundation like Wikipedia? Would it be better for a world? And this is the question I want to start our conversation with. I think that collaboration platforms are hard to come by. There are so many of them which are dead and which have this kind of cold start problem. And Pramod, I think you also, speaking of our conference's name, Thinking in Billions, are like someone who actually lives with billions. So let's start with you. What do you think is absolutely necessary to start a collaboration platform?
Thank you, Daniel, and pleasure to be here in this wonderful country that I've learned to love. I came in from India yesterday and arrived here in the afternoon, and looked at Tallinn airport and saw the sort of 55 people in the airport, and thought about Delhi airport, where we have at any time probably 50,000. So it's a little different experience. On public platforms, which we talked about, I do think there's a case for governments all over the world, and particularly Estonia with its leadership in this area, to change the game remarkably. And forgive me for taking a little, stop me before I go on too long. We have huge gaps in India, massive gaps. Education, health, financial inclusion, climate change, decarbonization, everywhere, massive gaps. We have fantastic engineering. We have more engineering capability than anyone else in the world. We just crossed 1.4 billion people as the most
Congratulations.
Yeah, right. I'm not sure it's we deserve it, but we've just crossed 1.4 billion as the largest country in population terms across China. But we also have huge gaps. And what India is doing, which I honestly think is, and forgive me for being biased about it, but it is honestly revolutionary right now. And I hope countries across the world will pay attention to it in terms of what they're doing, which is building digital public platforms. And this is being done by a gentleman called, ideally, Nandan Nilekani. He's the founder of Infosys.
So can you explain in a word, what is a digital public platform?
Right. He also brought in the Aadhaar identity card, which now 1.2 billion Indians have with biometrics on it. So I have it on my phone. Mm-hmm. It was used for COVID vaccinations when we got vaccination certificates to 1.2 billion people in India. If you got a vaccination, 5 minutes later, your identity card was updated with that vaccination. So it's been universal. So digital public platform, 4 or 5 examples. One is in e-commerce. So imagine e-commerce being owned not by Amazon and not by others, by public platforms for the government. So anybody can get onto that now. It's an open platform, APIs. Any small vendor can get onto it. Someone else can say, I'll provide you services. Someone else can say, I'll provide you supply chain, ranking, etc. And it will be open to all. We've just started it. I think this will create a million entrepreneurs across the country. It's already beginning to happen, where everybody who Amazon doesn't take.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Also, to make clear, was it the platform itself? It was started by the government?
It's started by government. It's owned by government. It'll be run by government.
Right. Okay.
The other area where platforms are being starting is in health. So they're building a digital health platform, which all our health records, anonymized, subject to our approval, are on the platform, but everybody else can use the data to provide health services. The benefit of that, as you know, is even in NHS, Canada, America, health services are segregated, independent, do not talk to each other, do not collaborate. This one allows you to collaborate at a scale and size for 1.2, 1.4 billion people, which is fantastic. It'll be revolutionary because we cannot solve our problems without technology. Last one I would just mention, and I'll turn back to you, is education. You know, we cannot produce enough teachers, sorry, let me go back to health. We cannot produce enough healthcare assistants, teachers, nurses, etc., not just in India, but in the UK. If you go to the NHS, the waiting queue for getting an appointment is 3 to 6 months. But this way, you can allow entrepreneurs to build capacity for you off a common standardized platform. Last one is education, where you can produce curriculum, you can bring in teachers, you can bring in tutors, you can bring in anybody you want onto these platforms, and anybody can partake of that solution, and it's a universal platform which cuts across the country. So I think it is revolutionary. It is going to change millions of lives in India. We're just starting. But I can already think it's the most exciting thing I've heard of.
Yeah, it's. I actually read your materials that you sent, and some kind of like things where children were helped, and all kind of side projects that are happening there is incredible. But just to take one more answer from you, what is really revolutionary about it? Is it revolutionary that India for the first time just decides that the government does something very strongly in digital domain, and you are actually not letting some kind of private company do it? Or is something else also revolutionary in that?
Very good. So I would point to 2 or 3 things. One is, it's like, you know, imagine if the internet was owned by a private company.
Yeah.
Right. It would be disastrous at this point in time.
I tend to agree.
Well, for countries, poor countries like India, we would be left way behind. We can't have that. And so one, it's the notion of government saying we'll put in virtual infrastructures like the West has put in physical infrastructure. So now the government is saying we'll put in virtual infrastructure across the country which anybody can tap in. 1. 2, it's being done at a cost which is remarkably low. And 3, it is allowing control of your data to reside entirely with you. Nobody can come in, take the data, sell it off to a million other people, make money off it and leaving you alone. But it allows you to control your own data, your own permissions, etc. And lastly, I would say, it's so easy to use across the board, and the rules are set by one central body which is elected, has representatives from across the country, and therefore, to me, sounds fairer than one monopoly owning.
Thank you. Very, very good. I think that when Pramod was talking about building up with the government base some infrastructure, which is almost like a physical infrastructure, but it is digital.
It is digital.
Yeah.
I'm a good capitalist, so don't get me wrong. Yeah. I'm not.
Of course, of course. So. At the same time, to start any kind of networked activity, you probably will always see like some kind of a cold start problem, a plateau where nothing really happens because people are not sure if you want to use this thing. Madelynn, can you comment on this kind of thing from a social side? If there is some kind of any kind of recommendations how actually people's interactions should happen, or how to make them happen faster on an emerging platform. It worked before?
It was working. Oh, there we go. No, I think it's super interesting, and we had a chance to connect before this panel, and I was able to research what's happening in India, and I think it's a really interesting example of exactly what you're describing of the public sector leaning into technology innovation and building technical infrastructure. I'm an infrastructure nerd on the technical side and on the social side, and I think it is one of the most critical places for innovation in these spaces, and we don't tend to do it because it's not sexy. We're talking about platforms, But actually, what is being pointed to there is not the platform. The platform's not revolutionary. I'm confident that just about anybody in this room that raised their hand that is working on a technology company either can or knows somebody who can build the platform layer. But the actual underlying infrastructure to be able to do that, both the technical infrastructure and then also what you're pointing to is their social infrastructure, right? So you mentioned around the idea that this is something that could be exported, that other countries could do this. I can tell you right now, coming from Silicon Valley, that will not work in the US. Not because there isn't the technical prowess, not because there isn't the capital, but because the social infrastructure, the social constructs and contracts are not there. And so when we think about, I mean, I love that this event is about talking in billions. Right? And that thinking about that kind of scale. And we're here to talk about, I think, not just how we collaborate together, and that's where I would challenge us to look at something like that example and say, well, where does the private sector step into that? Where do the entrepreneurs step into that, right? So how do we not just collaborate more effectively, but actually cooperate, which requires that we have that skin in the game, and looking at the social constructs and the social infrastructure that is required, the financial infrastructure that's required, the legal infrastructure that's required for us to actually be able to scale these to billions to trillions, right? Maybe that's next year, is the thinking in trillions, right? That is, I think, the fundamental question and opportunity when we're talking about how do we collaborate at the type of scale necessary.
I think that the cultural issue also in Estonia, just if you're not from Estonia, I will just tell you very briefly why we are such a poster boy in digital society, or at least we have this reputation. I think that we also have this kind of national belief in IT. It almost is like a religion. And we built Skype, and after that we had like our own church, which was Skype. We could talk in there and things like that. But you can't export this. And you had to export something else. You have to export some kind of trust mechanism, some kind of understanding that this thing works. And then I also realized that sometimes it can be either network effect, because India is already so big, 1.4 billion, that if 1.4 billion people probably have tested this, and it can't be wrong since it's also open and open source, and we see some stuff there. Or you have some kind of proxy values, and I think that one way to see it is that if you believe in, I don't know, Finland, that they are not stabbing you in the back, you take their solutions and you start using them, maybe. Or if you like, I don't know, UK, and you start using their solutions. But there is no easy way of scaling your own country's digital platform, trust building, cooperation across the border, unless you get a private company behind it, like a big one.
If I may disagree a little bit on that.
Okay.
I appreciate in the US it won't work. I've worked there for years. It's very heavily private sector driven. The notion that government would do all of this is, anathema, I know, to a lot of people. However, what they're trying to do in India is they're just building the platform and putting it out there. And say, now, whoever wants to use it, use it. And the benefits are so huge that people are jumping on it. It's like the internet. When the internet was built, you didn't have to tell people, use it, use it, use it. People found it so incredibly useful that everybody started using it. And that's the way it's been crafted, because telling a billion, Indians are notoriously indisciplined, including me. Telling 1.4 of us to do something in one fashion is impossible, I promise you. It will never happen. You have to make it so beneficial, and it's been made so fantastic and easy to use, everybody's jumping on it. That's what's happening, and that's where it's different versus government building. By the way, it's being built by the private sector with government funding it. And that's why it's moving very fast. And that's what I would recommend for other countries. So when we talk to other countries, and we're talking to other countries about doing it, they're also saying, just tell us how you built it, and we'll build it, and let citizens use it.
Okay, but you have any comment on that? No?
More, I have a question. I also disagree, but I want to push back a little bit on you in the Estonian context. And you're talking about you can't export the values, but isn't that what Silicon Valley has been doing to the rest of the world. I mean, when Latitude is coming out, we've got the rest of the events. The amount of times that I have heard the word unicorn brought up, and the event hasn't, the official event hasn't started yet, is mind-boggling to me. So that's not government that's doing that. That's a cultural thing that is coming through.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with you. I didn't want to say you can't export values because it's done all the time, and it's called soft power, and it really works. But I was thinking that you can't maybe export your own religion, which we have this very, very strong national identity across ID. So I stand corrected, and I also agree. But Jochen, you, when we talked before, there was one word which I really noticed in your talk, which was facilitation. Was that the right word to notice?
Yes.
You are doing a lot of facilitation.
Yeah, that's right.
In Germany.
Of course.
Okay, tell us about it.
Thank you for having us and giving me the opportunity to talk about like our position on building platforms and collaborating with the private sector. Mm-hmm. Because from a government perspective, I think we are not like very good in building platforms ourselves. We are maybe not the best country in the world when it comes to e-government. So you guys are way better in that, but we are quite good in industry, and let me give an example about industry platform that we created in collaboration with the private sector. Because when you think of industrial production and of the levels and the supply chains, levels of production, well, there are so many companies that need to work together, and what they need to do is to share data to get the process done and to get the product produced. And so therefore you need a platform, you need a data infrastructure to do so. And what we saw in the government is that the main provider for such infrastructure come from abroad, come from other countries, come from other continents. I won't give you any names, but you know what I'm talking about. And so for the government, this was, we saw it and we say, okay, this is a question of sovereignty, of digital sovereignty, which is in our public interest, that the data and IP stays in Europe, stays in Germany. And, but we didn't have this infrastructure. There were not many huge great provider in Europe. So that's why we sat together and talked to the private sector, to companies like Siemens, SAP, Bosch, and Telecom, you name it. And so we all together set up an own sovereign and decentralized data infrastructure, which industry can use for sharing their data in the industrial process. And so our position and our role in that procedure was not that we as the government build the infrastructure ourselves, but that we give an impetus on it and also, yes, do a lot of funding, but we want this infrastructure to run itself, right? And we don't want to make operational decisions on what to do. That's the idea we have, because we think that the minister said it in his keynote, in his opening words, that innovation comes from the private sector. We as the government, well, we have our public interest we are pursuing, but we are, well, maybe not, we are not as good as the private sector when it comes to innovation.
But do you know how it all started? Did someone call someone in Siemens and say that we, from the government here, that we want to do something, or what's the first thing that happened?
It was pretty much a bit like this, actually. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this is how these things.
I think so.
Start,
It is a lot of this kind of strong ties thing as well. That people need to know people. And do you think that in Germany, for example, people also mingle enough between the sectors? like get to know each other? Are they familiar with each other?
This is definitely one thing we are still working on. For example, there was one panel about public procurement, and so when the government does not take the role as a facilitator but as a customer, and in that case we need to get much more awareness inside the public, inside the government and inside the public sectors, that startups and the private sector can be very useful, and that they provide very interesting and innovative products. And so in this sector, when the government acts as a customer, there we could work more and more with startups, because for them there's this problem also of procurement law. That's why sometimes startups themselves they are reluctant to work together with the government, because it's so complicated from time to time.
I will come back to you. Meanwhile, try to also think the most beautiful example of that cooperation that you have had in Germany. And I actually want to now go to this direction and ask you, Pramod, how do you keep away bad actors? That's like huge, like this market, there is such an incentive, there is such a, like, so much to win also by bad acting. How you possibly like keep that? I remember, like in Estonia, everybody knows everyone, and like the guys who invented Skype also were around, and at some point they invented Skype, and then they tried to make some kind of Skype market, which was meant like additionally to making calls, you could also like sell services on Skype, and it totally tanked because there were like all type of fortune tellers already at that time, and different kind of spam and all that kind of thing. How do you actually do this?
Yes, it's the most critical question when you come to a big public-private partnership where the citizens certainly expect to trust what you have out there and believe in it, because perhaps it's backed by not just one company, but it's backed by the government as well. I do think that what has happened is, with the ability to start regulating, putting some very high-level regulations right at the beginning really helps. So in healthcare, for instance, if you can put in regulations right up front which say how your data will be used, who will use them, what are the circumstances under which you can use them, what is the permissions you can give, and have a very light touch regulation, I think that helps. Versus today, unfortunately, like the discussion on ChatGPT earlier, we're chasing technology development all the time, and laws and regulations will rarely catch up.
So
laws.
Laws.
I think to some extent laws, but I do think the natural marketplace also dissipates bad actors fairly quickly. I shouldn't say this because tomorrow we'll find a bad actor who disrupts the world and it'll be the end of that story. But I do think the markets are acting much more quickly. I thought the earlier comment from the earlier panel was fantastic, which is at some point you start believing everything that you read on the internet and say it's all fake news, and you use your own, you won't get to that stage ever, but you start using your own filters much more carefully. We all do already. So I think the market will allow it to do it, but I think we have to start thinking far more rigorously about light touch regulation in many of these areas, because otherwise this data is already gone, it's already being used, and there's no way to pull it back.
It's probably too late.
It's too late, in many cases.
Okay, but Madelynn, also the same question about bad actors.
Yeah, I'm going to expand on.
Also, yeah, please.
Expand on that, because I think, and I want to up-level us a little bit here, because even, like, we're having a conversation about collaborating for billions, and yet the conversation still seems to be public versus private.
Right.
Us versus them. And I think that that's a mistake, right? And we're talking about, I'm thinking about the original Alexander's talk at the beginning of this, of talking about the role of ecosystems, right? And as we talk about innovation, we talk about ecosystems a lot, and it is an ecological term, which is to say that every player has a role in the type of innovation that we're trying to see happen, in the innovation that we need to see happen for the world that we want to live in. So government has a role, and I think as you're identifying, like light regulation and being ahead of the curve is very beneficial there. Startups have a role to play in that. Banks have a role to play, and the financiers and the investors have a role to play in that. And so part of that is actually, I think this initial piece, even before regulation, is where are the places that we can come together to have these conversations as an ecosystem and actually be able to be in those discussions, because oftentimes the risk is that certain stakeholders get left off the table. Right? And whoever has the most wealth or the most power, those are the stakeholders that we're end up building for. And so the relation of bad actors, part of that is also identifying what are the necessary incentives and mechanisms to make this change happen, right? And there is the positive and the negative, right? So we need the mechanisms to be able to disincentivize bad actors. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's part of, and oftentimes that is more effective than creating the walls up front. Equally, I think in the example of the infrastructure that we described at the beginning, where are the places where we incentivize folks to make these changes? And using that, I did some work with an organization out of Mexico that works with small-scale fisheries towards sustainable development goals. It's an open data play. It's very much grounded in data sovereignty. We have very strong ties in with the Mexican government. And that's the infrastructure layer, right? That's the open data that is flowing between fishers, between research institutions, between government to understand patterns of overfishing, right? The platform layer is it's a logbook. It is a logbook for fishers to be able to track their logs, to log their catch. They have to report it to the government. It is the only digital logbook platform out there. So that platform layer is the incentive. Right? It is something that is creating immediate utility for them in their day-to-day. But again, the underpinning of that is something that was created with multiple stakeholders at the table. We talked to fishers, we brought in the government, we rewrote legislation so that we could actually work with them to create essentially what will become Mexico's first data co-op. Because the legislation wasn't there to be able to support that. And we had to work with the researchers. So that's, I appreciate I'm like bringing this up a little bit from a meta perspective, but these are the conversations that I think we don't get to have. We get into the technology, right? And we get into well, this is what government needs to do. This is what the startups need to do. This is what investors need to do, rather than actually taking a much more holistic approach to the conversation.
I think this was a beautiful turn for this conversation, because I also actually happen to believe in coordinating many perspectives and putting them together. And that brings me to a last question today. I think that this is something that needs both platforms and needs also political skill sets. I think there is no other way forward but taking into account very many different perspectives that have become very powerful, because everybody can also communicate. In a way, it seems like really a really good idea, but then we realize that we are not able to deal with this, and what are the skills to deal with all the perspectives from fishermen to bankers. And I think that the skills are actually there. There are a lot of things to learn from, I think, from deliberative democracy and from the same discipline called coordination of perspectives. And I think that all the governments at some point find that there is no other way. We need to start doing this. So we started from digital infrastructure, we started from some kind of social infrastructure, but above that, all this kind of thing has to be coming together on some kind of society and governance level with a different viewpoint. And I think the last panel had also something informative about that. It was maybe too much. It was about getting really relaxed about what happens, because we don't know how to govern this. But maybe there is some kind of middle road where we can actually do something. And I think we need to learn very fast on political public service level how to be honest, how to be collaborative, how to understand that, I don't know, inclusion is not just a bureaucracy. It's something much more Okay, but Jochen, about examples, do you already have something ready to tell us about what has been done with the data in cooperation with private sector in Germany?
Well, the Gaia X network that I was talking about, it's already in place. However, another thing, but which is really important, is that all these ways of thinking, of being open, that needs to come to our minds and needs to be in our heads, we as the government officials and,
right.
and civil servants, and that's why we are collaborating with some private actors that are helping us in doing that. There was an association called Work for Germany. We have a GovTech campus, as it's called, and they are all aiming at changing our mindsets, stop thinking in silos, seeing startups as a source of innovation, and how we can collaborate in a more open way, and that will take time. But I'm quite optimistic because so there are many new colleagues are entering the public service, and things will change in some years.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes. I think, Pramod, you've been silent for a while. Maybe you have some kind of response to what has been told here, response?
Sure. So I think the point about collaboration is exactly right. I actually don't think any of the platforms that are being built there would be possible without intense collaboration between public and private, okay? Because imagine asking 1.2 billion people to go and get an identity card. There's no law which said you have to get it. What was created was incentives for them to come and get it, okay? And that requires intense collaboration with state governments, with farmers, with agriculturalists, with educationists, with everywhere. So the entire ecosystem. It's easier to do it if, I think, governments start thinking much more widely about what is in scope for them. While I appreciate the point about the US and the UK, the fact is those governments provide education. They provide highways. They provide a lot of public services. And if we start thinking about this as a collaborative effort to provide public services for areas that are so critical and core, healthcare, climate change, etc., then perhaps in many countries, in some countries culturally it'll never happen, but I hope in other parts it can happen, and particularly in Estonia, which is such a fantastic example.
Can we use your system?
100%.
Or maybe you use ours, e-residency.
Exactly. But I think the potential in this is fantastic. We're seeing millions of entrepreneurs jump onto these platforms in a way I have never seen in my life before.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Thank you, everyone. We're nicely in time. If there is a question, if moderator allows, I don't know, you can check. It's your your decision.
I may or may not have a couple of questions. I would encourage the other two people that ask a question to maybe come up to the speakers afterwards.
Sure.
We've got a lovely session of, well, it's called networking, but it's food and drink and talk. But perhaps one question, most of us are still not thinking in billions. How to operationalize this concept for public servants? What is the action item to get done right now? This was a question asked by Mick. Thanks.
Ooh. I'm really not, I don't know the good answer, but I think that always what I have been thinking in Estonian context is that it's getting better, but we don't always realize what is possible. And I think that bringing in the best minds in the world to have this kind of discussions here is always like the most important way, that you always know that you are one step away in a network from someone who could already have achieved something, and I think there is no other way. There are some things like you can't do faster, like you just have to work with them. And also to end, I read a book which was called, it was like a fever, and it was about how black people got into fight for their rights in US. And normally we in Europe, we may actually think that this happened like that, but it didn't. Rosa Parks didn't stand up and sit in a bus in some place where it was not allowed to. It was a huge organizing work for a change. It was like a huge, like thousands of people doing something. And maybe in tech sector, sometimes people think that things just happen, and they hope they happen to them too. And also in public sector, sometimes you think it may happen to me too, but it doesn't, because you have to do a really big effort, and also changing minds around you in departments, in government, and politicians, and especially the parties. I think political parties are very, how to say, inertia. They have a lot of inertia. They do things that have been successful before. But to create the real change, really just, it's very hard. I think that's the answer sometimes. And you can think that we are not there yet, but if you just keep pushing, it may actually work.